Uh, Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Martin Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust, and I'm delighted to welcome Alan Lane, who is Artistic Director of Slung, to have a chat this evening. We're doing this talk during Heritage Open Days week, which runs until the 18th of September. Some of you will have picked up a copy of our brochure, which has many of the events, not all of the events. So the best thing to do is to go to the website if you want to get the up-to-date listing, the Heritage Open Days website. The theme this year for Heritage Open Days is inventions, innovations, and discoveries. I mean, you think about John Smeaton, engineers, you think about Louis Leprance, the first moving image in Leeds, in the world that was filmed in Leeds. People like Benjamin Gott. You think about these famous Victorian inventors or people from earlier on. But maybe you don't think so much about contemporary invention and innovation. And actually, although it might be surprising, what we're going to be talking about this evening is very much in line with this theme, invention and innovation, as we'll find out in the next three-quarters of an hour or so, through the work that Alan's been doing with Slung Low. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. What I'm going to do now is just ask Alan to say a little bit. If you could just say a bit about yourself, a bit about Slung Low. We'll kick off with that, and then we'll crack on.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here. I'm Alan, and I'm one quarter at the minute of Slung Low, which is a theatre company that specialises in large outdoor theatre shows. Something called People's Theatre, which is where people who make a living making theatre meet people who don't make a living making theatre. And we might say professional and amateur, and we could unpack those words if we were talking about that tonight. And they make something together, and it's something that neither group could make. So you end up with something that is often extraordinary, but is certainly rare. And these things normally take place in city centres, and there are hundreds of people in the cast, and there's normally explosions and all sorts of good stuff going on. And we've done that for 20 years, and we get commissioned to do that all over the country. But we've always, or for the last 10 years at least, been based in Holbeck, which is inner city, South Leeds ward, which is the most extraordinary place. And from a historical point of view, was kind of for about a heartbeat, the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And since then has gone through all the turbulent times that the nation has. So it got whacked by post-war decline. It got whacked by kind of Thatcher government. It got whacked by austerity. It definitely got whacked by COVID. And now it's about to get whacked again by the cost of living crisis. And so we've been based there for 10 years. And alongside those big shows that we make, our job, the thing that we are passionate about, is we are to provide the best possible cultural life for the people of Holbeck. And we do that in all sorts of ways. And we used to be based in Railway Arch, and we would put shows on there from visiting artists, and everything we do is pay what you decide. So the audience pay at the end what they decide. And that isn't an act of charity, that's an act of politics. It's an understanding that as customers, we are not the most interesting thing we can be. And we are in the fortunate position, the last bit of our introduction, is that we're beyond the market, which means that the government gives us money. It gives money to about, I think, 700 organisations, from the RSC to Opera North to Slung Low. They give money every year to just crack on and get on with it. And so, and you do that in all sorts of ways. So obviously, you know how the National Theatre do it, and how Slung Low does it is we use that money to ensure that we can deliver the best possible cultural life for the people of Holbeck. That's probably the best potted history of Slung Low I can give.
What made you start Slung Low in the first place? I mean, where were you before you started it? Immediately before, were you at university? Was it,
Yeah. So
did you have theatrical background? How did it all start?
No, I grew up on army bases. My father was in the RAF, so I travelled around a lot. And I went to university in Sheffield, and a group of us enjoyed making theatre. And we started it in the same way that, me and you might say, let's go to the moon. Like we said, we'll start a theatre company, and we had no idea what that meant. And then slowly but surely, over about 10 years, it was slightly less than that, in Yorkshire, we tried to work out how to be useful and how to make that work. And for Slung Low, when it became useful, it started to understand that people inherently get really excited about being told stories. And they inherently get excited about being told, like, live, people talking to them. But that you know, a good piece of theatre at your local theatre is going to cost 25, 30 pounds. And 25, 30 pounds is beyond the reach of an awful lot of people in this country. So everybody who works for Slung gets paid the average wage of the nation, and we all get paid exactly the same. Doesn't matter what job you do, you get paid that. So I'm the artistic director, Matt's the technical director. If someone came in tomorrow to be an assistant to anybody, they would still get paid the same. And that's the average wage of the nation. So as many people get paid more than us as get paid less than us. And we can't afford to go to the theatre. So that tells us something, and it's extraordinary because this country spends 500 million pounds of public money to help the arts, to help culture. We understand that the cultural life is really important, but people on the average wage of the nation cannot afford to go regularly to the theatre, and that strikes me as mad. So we realised our job was to take the best level product. We've made shows for the RSC, we've made shows for the BBC, and take that and make them pay what you decide, and place them in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see that quality of work. And that's what we've done. That's what we've done for 20 years. My argument is that for the last 10 years we've been quite good at it, and the first 10 years we were not so good at it, but we were practicing, so that was okay.
That's right. We're going to be talking about this book, Alan, which you produced.
Like snap.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, mine's got all sorts of post-it notes in it. Just sort of little bits of it that I thought were particularly interesting and might be worth sort of expanding on. But there's actually something on the back of the book that I thought was very interesting, and it sort of touches upon what you've just said about the way that Slung Low operates, the way that you know that everyone essentially gets paid the same and pays you feel and all of that sort of thing. So you said this on the back: there are children in Holbeck without crayons, living in a city with an opera company paid for with money from all of us. Until everyone has crayons, no one gets opera. That's what I believe. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because clearly, you've talked about the whatever the figure was, half a billion quid spent on the arts. So clearly, people are getting the arts, and very high-end arts that is very expensive. Down to sort of a one-man band type thing, I suppose.
I mean.
So what did you mean when you said that?
So I'm a governor in our local primary school. It's called Ingram Road Primary School. It's an amazing place led by an amazing woman called Sarah Millard, and the kids there are brilliant. An awful lot of those kids have arrived recently into the country because Holbeck is one of the places that the government puts people who've arrived recently into the country. So you can imagine there's 46 languages are taught in this school. So there's basically no middle class. So there's none of that additional support that can be put into them. And those kids are amazing. And those kids are bright and energetic and determined and all the things that you want kids to be. And they live in a city that's got an amazing opera company. This is really embarrassing because my next show is including Opera North. So I'm like going around flogging this book, and and they're brilliant. Absolutely. And we've got an amazing ballet company. We've got an amazing theatre company, and I could go on. But if you live in Holbeck, you don't see a poster for any of those things. Now, I totally understand why, because those guys, they get a lot of money, but they don't get enough, and they've got to try and get people in who can buy a ticket. And so if you've got only so many posters and you're the marketing manager and you're deciding where you're going to put those posters, you don't go and put them in Holbeck. And let me tell you why, because even if you make those tickets free, and sometimes those organisations do, there's no bus from the city centre after a show to get them back. And that's because the people who decide the buses, there's no money to be made. And no one, quite frankly, thinks anybody in Holbeck's going to be going to the opera, because snotty people think that. Now, when we put work shows on in Holbeck, for the last 4 years, we've run the oldest work. We've been managers for the oldest working men's club in Britain. And the most popular thing we put on, by some distance, is opera. Mm. Now, as an opera company, there's an amazing opera company in this city, putting on amazing operas in a big theatre, in a place where there is no public transport to get to. Having to charge tickets for loads of reasons, which we'll get into, that the people of Holbeck simply could not afford. And yet, you could walk there from Holbeck. And I think that's an act of cruelty, because I think that what that requires is a system, not individuals. The individuals are all good, but a system that basically says, the kids of Holbeck don't deserve this, and they wouldn't know what to do with it if they got it. Now, it has been my absolute lived experience that that is not true, but we have a system that kind of thinks that basically makes them, it's statistics, isn't it? Statistically, you put the posters where you're going to get the most amount of customers. And that means the quality, the momentum in Holbeck He's just, and other places, just Holbeck's a place, the hill I'm going to die on. But there are, you will all know, I'm looking at some of the names, I recognize some of the names in the attendees. You'll know places like this. And it means that the money isn't invested, the time isn't invested, and slowly but surely, you go 40 years since anybody saw something with city centre, it's there all the time. Mm. North Leeds, it's there all the time. Now, people aren't doing it because they hate the people of Holbeck. They just dismiss the people of Holbeck, and that isn't good enough. So when you write a book, and it does quite well, thanks very much, on the back, you put something that makes people sit up and go, what does he mean by that? Does he really want to come and take our opera company? And I'm like, no, I don't. Don't make me. Don't make me want to do that. In fairness to them, Opera North are absolutely amazing, and they are the opera company that comes and plays in the car park of the oldest working men's club in Britain. However, they come and play with a bloke on an accordion and 2 singers. Now, if you've never heard an orchestra and a full chorus of an opera company, then it's an absolute delight. And I think that absolute delight would go down a storm in Holbeck. And it is absolutely our mission at Slung Low to make that happen no matter how. And so that's why we say, if there are kids with no crayons in this city, this glorious city that prides itself on so much, then we should probably maybe say, stop that opera until we've sorted out the basics. Let's get everyone crayons. Let's get everyone engaged. And then we'll go back to that. And that makes people very angry. People have got very angry about that quote. They're like, why are you trying to take our opera company? I'm like, I'm not. I'm trying to make sure everyone gets a slice of it. Mm. We could do with a little bit of fear at the minute with some of the decision makers. And that sentence makes them a bit scared. And I think that's okay.
That's a really good answer, and I think we understand where you're coming from. I'm going to in a minute move on to the period that you cover in the memoir, but there's one thing that maybe slightly leads on from what you've just said, and I guess leads on from one or two of the things that you've said so far, which is around sort of politics and political activism, if you like, or taking a stand. You say in the book that Slung Low isn't a charity. You're not a charity. Yeah. You're not a registered charity. And you say there are lots of reasons for this. Look at the political pressure the government is putting on charities not to campaign against the causes of social injustice they spend their time and money trying to fix, or the inequalities that are baked into who we ask to sit on the boards of our cultural charities, and the wrong-headed idea that real change happens if you leave final authority in the hands of people who, by definition, have done very well out of the current system. You also say it's partly because you don't want to work for other people.
That does sound like me.
Which is
fine. That's true.
But you also say that had you been a charity, and this is a really important point, you couldn't have done what you did during the COVID period. No. Leeds Civic Trust couldn't have done what you did. We could have said, right, okay, we're just going to stop our objects around planning, development, design, heritage, etc. We're going to park those, and we're going to do something completely different because of COVID. On the margins, yes, we can do that. We can adapt how we work and how we communicate with our members, with our supporters, and with the people Leeds. But we couldn't really change what we do. Whereas because you're not actually a registered charity, that enables you to be quite fleet of foot, really, and to say, right, we're just going to do this now. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing about Slung Low is that we do what is necessary to achieve the things we want to do, and the responsibility has to be ours. So when we make theatre, we like large scale theatre. The last really big one we made was on a floating platform in 100 square meters of water with 200 people on the set. The set revolved, set on fire, went sank, and people think, they go, well, hang on a minute, you're 4 people, you're a very fleet of foot, limited by guarantee theatre company, like that makes you more risky. And you're like, well, actually, if anything goes wrong, it's not just I'm in trouble, it's my world. Because my best friends, or in this instance, like literally my best friends and my wife and myself were the divers on that show. So we were the ones who go, if we get this wrong, then it is literally our world. And if it goes wrong, then the consequences and the financial consequences, the legal consequences, everything else, in the end are mine. I'm in a team, we take shared responsibility. But in the end, if anybody's going to prison, it's this guy. That's vital. That is absolutely vital, because it means that at no point can I say I'm not going to do the right thing because this squad. I've noticed the vice president, the people that I'm responsible for, I'm responsible to rather than working to, and that's really important. And so I think that when COVID happened, we were a theatre company. We were running a working men's club. But actually, what our community really desperately needed was, first of all, social care referral, and then what it really needed was a food bank. And so that's what we did. If we'd been a charity, and I used to have chief executive theatres ringing me up going, how come we can't do what you're doing? And I said, well, I don't know, mate, get on with it. And he's like, my board won't let me. And the board didn't make them, not because they're evil, not because of anything else, but because the board's legal responsibility is to protect that organisation for the future. Now, I would argue that I think there was another way of looking at it, which is to say, if you lose contact with your community during what turned out to be nearly 2 years off, then it's going to be very hard to build that back. And that is an existential threat for a theatre building that requires on public subsidy. So I would say that to protect the long-term interests of the institution, like some of them did, not many, but they did, open your doors, become a food bank, get it done, and look like you are a part of everybody's everyday life. However, that is a very radical, dynamic, and not popular argument. And in fact, as we know, groups of people making decisions, especially without expertise, especially without personal responsibility, tend to be incredibly conservative. Small c, I'm not making a point. So they all decided not to, and as a result, most people thought that they didn't behave very well. There was a moment we had this set, and it was sank, and it was meant to come back up, and it didn't. So basically, we had to send someone down 3.5 meters in pitch black water to find it, and the person we decided to send was me. And I went down, and it took hours and hours. Now I'm swimming through a metal frame underwater, basically. And I'm making a series of decisions because I desperately do not want to die, but I want the thing to come up. And I'm making a series of decisions, and they're based on me being there. I can't see anything, but I can feel things. And I'm the guy at that moment in what they call SME. I have the subject matter expert. I am the one that knows the information. Now, if we could put a camera on me with some headphones so that you directed me through that, you would take less risks than me. Not because you're not brave or anything else, but because you would be worried about killing me and you have less information. And that's what we do with boards. That's what we do with charities. We put that distance and we go, that makes us safe. And I go, it does make you safe. And the reason why you're safe is you're now slow. And that's great. If you're running the RSC, you want it to be slow, right? Because you want the RSC to be here forever. But if you're running Slung Low and you're in a moment of crisis in a ward with the worst, Holbeck has the #1 worst health outcomes in England. So we have no wiggle room. If there is a crisis, we are going to be desperate tomorrow. So someone needs to act. And it wasn't just this. There was loads of great organisations and individuals around it. So that's the reason. And it makes us we're not the only ones, but we're very rare in the arts world to not be. And it means that sometimes funders come to us and say, we're not going to fund you. And I'm like, that's fine. Most of those funders do, after a number of years, come back and say, we're willing now to take the risk on funding you because we've seen you do your work. And actually, we need you to do the thing we want doing. And it turns out you're best placed. It's very hard for the Arts Council and for the people that finally pay us money, for them to argue about dynamism whilst also demanding that every organisation will run basically by a group of 8 people who you've never heard of. That's not dynamic. It might be safe, and it is. It is much safer than Slung Low. But it's not as dynamic.
Alan, we were talking before we started about maybe you might read a couple of things out of the book, and maybe there's a section about being useful and kind.
Yeah,
that might just lead us in. Would you do that? Yeah, of course.
It's not very long, so don't worry. Okay, here we go. Be useful, be kind. There are 3 clear values that Slung Low operates by. Be useful, be kind. Everyone gets what they want, but no one else gets to stop others getting what they want. When we moved into the Holbeck, the oldest working men's club in Britain, it was that final, but no one else gets to stop others getting what they want, that led to the most difficult conversation and allowed the most transformation. And so it was with our food bank. Our decision to become a non-means tested self-referral food bank meant that whoever asked for food would receive it. The authorities weren't all that happy, but the response from our own community was the most surprising. The idea of a feckless poor sitting watching their flat screen with their half-dozen children spawned to secure their council house is a myth. A corruption of the reality that capitalism requires parts of society to be on poorly paid, 0-hour contract work, propped up by a moralizing benefit system that forces people to live in poverty we're collectively content to allow as long as we don't look too closely. And one of the revelations that was the most surprising in this whole affair is that nowhere is this myth most passionately felt than in the communities with the most food parcel need. Little has shocked me more during the process than when we cannot raise anyone in the house and we ask the neighbours to take it in for them and they refuse. They don't deserve it, they would always say.
Really, really, really interesting, that one. So just reversing back very slightly, just
Yeah.
tell us quickly how you got involved with Holbeck Working Men's Club. So Holbeck Working Men's Club is the longest. The club. How do you put this in a sentence? It says it on the blue
Yeah,
plaque, and it's
it does.
phrased better than I can phrase it,
Yeah,
actually.
so it's been in constant use. It's the oldest club that's been in constant use. However, so there are clubs that existed beforehand, but they closed and reopened and everything else. So we say we're the oldest working men's club in Britain, and then the Civic Trust quite rightly has to say there are some caveats about that. And I'm like, I don't care about the caveats, man. We got a blue plaque. But yeah, so the Holbeck is an absolutely amazing place. It's obviously in Holbeck. It sits in the middle of a housing estate, and downstairs there are bars. And if you haven't been, you should definitely come. It's brilliant, and it is exactly as you would expect it to be. The carpet gives you a migraine, and there's a snooker room with a full-size snooker table, and there's a lounge where they play bingo, which is absolutely the most sacred moment Sunday. If you interrupt that, then more fool you, is what I say. And then upstairs there's a performance space that was really, really vibrant in the kind of 50s, 60s post-war time that Eric Wise came through there with his father. And it's now a 200-seater cabaret space, which is really exciting. And then the building goes on. So there's a flat where the guys that, the people that used to run it live, which is now turned into artist accommodation. And we were based in Railway Arches, which were great, but cold and a bit grotty. And we needed somewhere warm to rehearse a kids show. So we started rehearsing there, and our producer, Joanna, got chatting with the club had some financial difficulties, like all club, and an amazing group of volunteers had moved in and started running the place as volunteers, led by a pair of men, Dennis and Ian, and they really kind of turned it around and got it going. But it's also true that the whole thing, oftentimes cleaning and everything, was being done on a volunteer basis, and there's a limit to how many years you can do that for before you start falling over. So we made a proposal, which was we would move in, we would pay off all their debts, had quite a lot of historic debts. We would pay off their debts, and then we would move in as managers, and we would guarantee them against loss every year. So they consistently made a loss because they started paying people, and so we said, well, let's just make sure you never run into debt. And so our kind of contribution to the club would be, as managers, to fill the space upstairs with events that would generate income for the bar, and then as a backstop, just guarantee them against loss. And so we did that, and the book is full of, there's some glorious moments, and I'm incredibly proud of what we do. There's also just naturally some moments of tension where you just get communities mixing in a very difficult way. And then we'd done that for about a year and a half, and we just got to the point where we were like competent at running the bar, like doing all the things that you need to do and keeping it busy. And we have a huge football fan supporters groups that come in that are brilliant. And then COVID hit, so we had to shut the bar. And then out of that came just the realization that there was a need for basically a food bank. I mean, it was a bit more sophisticated than that, but mostly it was just finding huge amounts of food and then giving it away as quickly as possible.
I mean, you sort of mentioned about the sort of the long history of the club, and I think one an interesting sort of reflection on that is how the uses of clubs have changed over time. So there's a bit in the book where you're talking about setting up the food bank, and you say let me find it. So the 250-seat cabaret event room, which once had the likes of Ernie Wise performing it, and only last year saw Davina De Campo belt out with Whitney Houston numbers. Now it was full of whiteboards and laptops. And, going back further in history, they had a different function, didn't they, these clubs? It wasn't just about having a drink and playing bingo and having a game of snooker.
Yeah.
So they have constantly changed, actually, haven't they?
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we try to draw out in the book. Also available as an audio book. You can listen to it.
Is it
but
really?
Actually, it's on Audible. It's very funny. I do it, and I do all the voices. I had a lot of fun doing it. But but there is a tension there. So when the first paragraph of the club, I've just got it here. The first paragraph of the club's friendly society constitution reads: "The objects of the club are to afford its members the means of social intercourse, mutual helpfulness, mental and moral improvement, and rational recreation." And when that opened in 1877, that was around a lecture hall and a baguette, like a games room, and actually. All these clubs were created in a time when drinking was certainly not something you were funding from the landed gentry for, and the bar wasn't important, and this was a part of this club was when it was first formed was part of that kind of growing adult education that Pitman Painters comes out of, or Quilliam Mosque in Liverpool, or these places where working men mostly, because it was an inherently sexist time, but still working people would go and be taught because they did not have access to those things. Open university didn't exist. The kind of these places where we go now for soft education just didn't exist. And these places provided that. Now, as that goes on, they become more, there's an amazing story that a lot of the older members talk about, like buses, rows and rows of buses that took the entire neighbourhood to Blackpool for a long weekend or a week. And one of the reasons why they could afford that was because all the men were coming back and drinking all their wages in the bar, and so there was a way of that money not going to a big organization. It was kept in the community. They would spend it on holidays, and on the one hand, that is amazing. What a brilliant progressive thing. But on the other hand, the kind of post-war future of these places, the reason why they were so financially successful was because of the burgeoning alcoholism in all the working, because the working conditions were bloody terrible. And then obviously Thatcher comes in, and all of a sudden there just aren't working men, or as many, and then the smoking ban, and so these places have had it chipped away. But I would say that also they have often been very evolutionary. So they've come from a place of adult education and community help, and they transformed themselves. And where they are now is in a real crossroads, which is you have a community in Holbeck that the vast majority of whom do not have drinking in windowless rooms for hours at a time on a Sunday as part of their culture, or they are too poor to do that sort of drinking because it's just a different world, or their religion or their culture or whatever forbids them. And so you have this, but if you're going to continue to sit at the heart of a place, you have to serve everybody, because if you don't, and this is, it runs through the book, but also just literally something I say in every meeting, is your membership is dying. You need to find other ways of getting people in. I would say that that's not a Holbeck thing. There's a great documentary on the BBC about the Railway Men's Club in Clacton-on-Sea, and they have exactly the same thing, which is their average membership is 76 plus. Well, that's madness. And it's the same for Holbeck. But yeah, the club has gone through evolutions, and I think when we were there, it went through a really quick evolution, but that was good, because I think I look back and think that it was a blessing that we were there in that moment of crisis, because we were able to, the senior members are very clear. It would have shut if we weren't there. They weren't allowed to leave the house for nearly a year.
I think when we came to discuss the blue plaque, there was a wake, I think, going on upstairs, a very loud and noisy wake. And I think it was an African sort of.
Okay,
quite different from the sort of what we're seeing this week. I mean, different culture, different approach. But I suppose that's an example of trying to make a building accessible and sort of democratic in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. So on a given week, so even this week, which is obviously a little subdued, the members will be in drinking and doing bingo. The football fans will be in. English as a second language courses happen 3 times a week. We have Conversation Club, which is where asylum seekers come and talk to the elderly, and at least 3 theatre companies will be rehearsing. The members have organised a Freddie Mercury tribute band a night on Friday, which looks like it's going to be an awful lot of fun. And then there's Leeds Dads, which is kind of father self-help parenting group on the Sunday, and 2 African charismatic churches will be in. Like that's off the top of my head. If I open the calendar, I find 3 or 4 other things. And the club maintains its position in society whilst it does all those things. If it just served any one of those things, or if it just served Slung Low as a rehearsal room, or it just did bingo, or it just did charismatic African churches, it fails to be useful, because that would be true in an upper middle class area, but in a place like Holbeck, it requires the energy efforts of everyone to maintain this. It is still, well, actually, I suppose the temple's open, but it's the largest public facing room, and it's certainly the only room that you could at the moment hire to have a high day or holiday celebration. So anything that happens in that area in Holbeck, 2,500 households, is going to happen at the club. And so our job when we arrived was just to make sure that the number and variety of people who felt confident and comfortable asking to use the club just got as large as possible. So we said no to nothing. I mean, literally, we said yes to everything. It was extraordinary, as you say, kind of wakes of 200 amazing African costumes, and that's not, you don't see that every day in Holbeck.
Absolutely not. So COVID hit.
Yeah.
All of that sort of diversity of activity suddenly, pretty much overnight, within a few days, became impossible. So just tell us what sort of, you know, what your immediate thoughts were when you realised that things, and who knew how long it was going to last, but things couldn't be like they were. You know, what was your immediate sort of feeling at that time?
Yeah, we had a meeting, because that's our response to everything, is to get around the pool table and go, what are we going to do? And there was a definite sense that because we just sort of felt like we cracked the back of it, we'd sort of earned people's trust. That if we just left, because the Arts Council said they'd keep funding us. We could all gone home for a year. A lot of theatre companies did. That if we did that, then we probably couldn't come back, or you know, we wouldn't just be starting from scratch. We'd be starting from minus. And so there was a sense of like, well, what's the most useful thing we can do? Because we are in a privileged position. We were young enough to sort of not be terrified. The volunteer sector in Holbeck is almost made up entirely of the retired, or the otherwise vulnerable. So there was a definite sense, people getting on the phone saying, "Can you come and do Meals on Wheels?" And we're like, "Yeah, I've never done Meals on Wheels before." And the local food banks were by amazing couple, David and Barbara, but they are not young, and there's a kind of extra risk there. So there was a definite sense of like, we can afford to take a risk and help. So we wrote a letter to our nearest 200 neighbours, which basically just said, we're your local theatre company. We've got a van. We've got a bit of money. We're still out and about. We're still, you know, like, hit us up if you need things. And they did. And they needed their dogs walking or you know, some food fetching, or a lot of the time, daughters and sons who lived in other cities would ring saying like, I normally go every couple of weeks to change my mum's bed sheets. Can you do it instead? And we were like, yep. So we did that. And then the council kind of heard that we'd done that. And we're like, that's cute. Could you do it for the whole ward? And the ward actually isn't just Holbeck. It's Holbeck, Beeston and Cottingley, which is a much larger. It is more people than we first thought. And then things started to really hot up. So people were asking for all sorts of things. But after a few weeks, it settled down so that really what they wanted was food. Because if you were on 0-hour contract, and that got stopped, and there was no money for 6 weeks, and you didn't have any money anyway, you were barely scraping by, and you've got 2 kids in a house, and you like, where are we getting our porridge from? And so we hooked up with an amazing man called Adam Smith with the Real Junk Food Project, who's a kind of pioneer in saving food, and the local primary school, which I've mentioned before, an amazing, and a number of other sorts of local charities who are friends. And we were like, right, let's really hunker down. And in fairness to City Council, we have a turbulent relationship with the City Council. They weren't massively happy that we sort of went rogue and started just reading off a different script, but they also in the end kind of knew that our hearts were good if we were a little hot-headed, so it all worked out. We became a little gang that was able to get it on. So we did that for 15 months. 15,202 food parcels, and believe me, the 2 count. There was
an issue about the number of times someone could come, and you got around that, didn't you?
Yeah. So the food bank we took over from Holbeck Food Bank, which is amazing, but they have a number of rules. The first of which was that there were questions around whether sex workers, of which we have a lot in Holbeck, would get food delivery, and then also you couldn't have more than 3 in 6 months, because there was this belief that you would become addicted to food parcels. And we were quite open with the food bank, Barbara and David, and we're like, we don't agree with that. So there was a bit of tension there, but then the council. So if you rang the council saying I need a food parcel, and you ring them a week later, and you get another one, and you ring them the third time, that's it then. You can't ring them back.
Mm.
And our thing was like, what are you talking about? Like, A, there isn't a week's food in this. B, like you're not, we don't have a solution to any of this. We weren't able to, we kept referring them to, there wasn't any help. Not really. They'd gone through that already. And also that no one was paying us. That's not quite true. We were being paid to do this, but we're paying nowhere near the actual cost of doing it. This thing cost, like well north of £150,000, and the council put in about 35% of that. So we were like, no, we're not going to take on your morality. So we did a thing which I still maintain was the best thing to do, but it did get us in a lot of trouble, which was if you rang, the third time you rang, I'd say, right, don't ever ring this number again. And then I gave them my mobile phone number. That was a mistake. So I would give them, my phone was useless when I was 6 months, but we would give you a phone number and say, only ever ring this now. And so what we did was we collected all that information, and then we would remove the names and report back to the council saying, this week we've been doing this number of calls. And the council after a while were like, why? We've not put any calls through for you. No one rings us anymore for Holbeck. And I was like, no, I know, because we gave them a different number. And they were quite rightly, they were like, well, that's ridiculous. Well, and if you're driven by morality and you don't care, like it cost so Slung has been going 20 years and it had saved a load of money from making really big theatre work and making a profit doing that. And we spent everything we had. Well, we spent everything we had on the club and the food bank. And so if you're driven by that idea of going, this is just the right thing to do, and I'm just trying to find a way to go home at night and go to sleep not feeling bad about my place in the world, I don't want to hear about people can only have 3 food parcels. I got mothers on the phone crying because their kids are hungry, and I'm not going to tell her no. And if your system tells her no, then I'm going to find a way to help her get around that system. And we were never snide about it. We were always very open about it. And I get the council have a job to do. And a lot of the council would ring us secretly and go, keep going. And then have to ring us and be like, you're outrageous. And I'm like, no, you're outrageous. And we sort of play that game a bit. And then there's a lot of that already exists in the city. So we didn't invent anything. There are a lot of really amazing people who've done this for a lot longer than us. And they kind of taught us that what we had was a non-means tested self-referral food bank, which is if you need food, you can ask for it. Now, we need to move people as a nation out of poverty and out of food poverty, but we're not going to do it by not giving them food. And we're actually not going to do it. And this is just a fact. You just have to believe me. We're not going to do it by making it hard to get free food, because these people didn't come because it was an easy option. They came because there were no other options. So it's an act of cruelty to put more barriers in their way. But they said, my God, everyone's going to get in touch. And we were like, yeah, everyone who needs food is going to get in touch. And maybe 10% of people who don't need food are going to get in touch. That's the cost of having a wide door. That's, in the same way the door's always open at the club. And I've got to be honest, 10% of everyone who walks through there makes my heart sink. But it's the other 90% that I'm interested in. I don't understand how we can live in the social, economic, political world that we live in. It's cruel. And if you spend any time in Holbeck, you understand it's cruel. And this was just a way that we could make a tiny, tiny dent in that cruelty. It didn't make us universally popular. However, we've got a lot of friends on Twitter and they kept us alive. And we would just constantly tell the story of what we're doing. And their donations in £5 and £10 just made the world a difference. It really added up to proper money. And it kept us going for 15 months.
That's brilliant. Could you read the section on the bingo hall? The
manna from heaven. Yes, manna from Mecca. Sorry, yeah, great. So manna from Mecca. Mecca want to give us a load of hot meals every day. Mecca, yeah, the bingo people, hot meals. Yeah, they're not open anymore, and they freeze us full of meals, and they've given permission to cook them and give them to us. So every day for months at midday, a team of volunteers would head off to the bingo hall and fill their takeaway delivery thermo bags with meals and polystyrene trays. The meals were what you would expect from a bingo hall: sausage and chips, pie and chips, burger and chips, chips and chips. And then as fast as they could, the volunteers would dash their cars to their list of addresses of families. From our various partners, we created a list of 65 children who we would deliver these hot meals to every day. What they lacked in vegetables and nutritional balance, they made up for in taste and excitement. If you've never delivered high-fat, high-salt content lunches to incredibly bored and very often incredibly hungry children in the middle of a pandemic, then you've not fully experienced the joy of people genuinely thrilled to see you. Children would rush from the door and grab the food trays from the delivery driver's hands. It hardly fitted with our push to healthy eating, but the glee the food brought was hard not to fill your heart with joy.
Yeah. There's also a bit in the book about a lot of burgers that you shifted.
Yes. Yeah. So Adam Smith from Real Junk Food Project. So what he does, which is, so food is wasted all the time in like in I don't mean like the stuff you don't eat tonight after your dinner, but in like lorry fulls that are going off. And because COVID smashed the supply chain, people were just literally throwing containers of food away. And Adam Smith believes that if we're going to save the world, it's going to be by stopping that. So he's not trying to fight poverty. He's genuinely trying to stop food waste because we're burning up the world. And so he gets companies ringing. And this is the thing. So you get a load of milk and you get a wagon full of milk. And today it's worth £10,000. And then the date ticks over. And now it's not worth £10,000. It's worth minus £3,000 because you have to pay to get rid of that milk. And it costs a fortune to get. Can't pour it down a drain. It will mess the drains up and you'll get sued. So he goes in and does that work. So actually, if you take that milk and you let it go off even more, you can feed it to pigs. Now you can sell it to pig farmers. And Adam Smith is doing this stuff. And he's a chef and he runs this. Honestly, if you don't know, Real Junk Food Project, Kindness Warehouse, it's amazing. So we were with him. So he heard that we were like doing this that crazy thing. And he's like, right, I'm going to back you up. So he would often ring and just say, I've got stuff, come fetch it. And the deal was we just had to take whatever he had. And one time he had 2 transit vans full of Burger King vegan burgers, but they were frozen. And these things are like worth £3 or £4. But if we don't have freezers, I mean, we had the freezer at the club, but you could fit hardly. Like these are 2 transit vans full. And so he gave them to us frozen and he said, you just need to get rid of them. So the 2 guys in the office, Ruth and Joanna, would just rang literally every school, every charity that we knew. And then me and Matt would raced around the city throwing these burger things out. And in the end, we still had 6 o'clock come and we were like, we've got to throw these away, which is just heartbreaking. And we still had a van full. And Joanna insisted, no, she's the producer. And she was like, we're not doing it. So we pulled the van, we put the door up on the back of the van and we just slowly crawled around Holbeck shouting, burgers. And people were on the phone like, mate, you've got to get down here with your car. And so we got rid of, I'm going to say, I think it's 10,000 burgers in a day. I think that's how many it was. It was obscene. But it was so telling. It would often happen. We one time had an entire lorry full of milk, Marks and Spencer's chocolate. And it was great. And they just went, do you want it? And I was like, it filled the club. And everyone got to eat Easter eggs. It was June. It was just like eating, or Gressingham ducks. We kept getting so many ducks. And no one knew how to cook a duck, which is quite reasonable. And they were like, how do you cook a duck? So we would all shout back, cook it like a chicken. Pretend you to be a king while you're eating it. And so, so there's a lot of waste in our society. And just connecting that waste up with people is the key. I think that's really all we did. I mean, we spent a lot of money when we got tired, but most of the time we were just racing. Leeds United had I think it was 5,000 litres of sour cream and something like 9,000 avocados because they were going to have this Mexican night for like hundreds and hundreds of people. And they were like, do you want these avocados? And I'm like, no. Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yeah. So it does, it's the insights in sort of food waste and all of that. It really brings it to the fore, doesn't it? It really does.
Yeah.
Incredible.
We once got given 400 bottles of alcohol-free gin, and because weirdly we think alcohol-free is alcoholic, like it counts, so you can't give it away in a food bank. So we just had like bottles, but what happened during COVID was these apps around free food really started to spring up. So we would just put them on there, and then blokes driving down from North Leeds going, hello, I'll take 5 bottles of the alcohol-free gin. And you're like, you can have as many as you want, mate. It's taking up room. Get rid. So it definitely, like, the market kicked in during that time, and when it realised there was all this waste. So a lot of those apps are quite good now, I think. They're getting rid of stuff.
So so this went on for what, 15 months or so?
Yeah, 15 months to the middle of last. I want to say last year, but I get so confused now. We did 15 months of it. So and we came out of the lockdown and the pub reopened, the club reopened, sorry, which is it's quite stressful because a lot of especially that first time when you had all those rules and the members didn't really like fulfill like obeying the rules, but also all of them were definitely like, we were worried they'd all die if they got COVID, at least before the jabs. So that was all quite stressful. And then the food bank rattled on, and then we just couldn't carry. I mean, it was costing tens of thousands of pounds, and it was also taking up all of our time. And we're a theatre company, and we kind of for a long time said, well, that doesn't matter. This is more important. And then something happened, which was talking to the school, and they said, no, your job here is to provide the wonder. that's your job. And the shows we make are big. People fly, people explode. They're big, there's big stories about gods and angels in the future, and I thought, well, actually, I look around and Holbeck's amazing and it's full of some brilliant organizations, but it doesn't have anyone whose job's that. Our job is to do the thing that everyone goes, whoa. And it was, and also, I mean, it was helpful that we just, like, producer was saying, we cannot afford to keep doing this. You will go bankrupt. And I was like, right, okay, well, we need a plan. So we shut the food bank, and in return, in replacement, we opened a community football club. A brilliant lad called Ewan came and wanted, there's no adult organised sport in Holbeck. And now there is. Holbeck Moor FC exists. It's got young teams, women teams, men's teams. It's incredibly popular. And because we're a theatre company, the first thing we did was get them a really good costume. So their strip is Gucci, because, like, of course we do. We're a theatre company. So that was our kind of like, look, we've got to turn the food bank off, but here's our contribution. And then we went back to running the club as a theatre, as a community centre, as a pay what you decide arts centre, and doing the other things. Like, we opened a theatre in Liverpool, the Prescott, the Shakespeare Playhouse. That's our job. We go places to put on big shows in other people's streets. So we had to get back to that, because that's how we made the money to pay for all the beans in the first place, and to pay, to keep the club running, because it is a very bad time to be running a pub in South Leeds. Like,
really?
You get through COVID, and then the gross profit margin, no one wants to come out. You can't cut the prices because you're not making any money on the beer anyway. And then someone tells you that the heating bill at the club will go up 415% in the next 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, I mean, if you saw their books, like, that's, I don't know what you do. But that's true for all clubs and pubs. But yeah, it's tough. It is tough.
There was another bit you were going to read.
I was going to read a little bit about Eric.
Yeah, could you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. In the first week of referrals, there was a request to visit a man called Eric, who lived in sheltered accommodation flats not far over the motorway. I went to see Eric and fetch his shopping list. He met me leaning against the door, holding his walking stick like a rifle. Pew, pew, he shouted, and not knowing what else to do, I fell to the floor, clasping my chest. Hit. He was 83. He got angry when I misremembered that as 93, and we would go on to deliver him a food package almost every other day for 10 months. Not a full one, just what he needed, and special treats that he would firmly request were included, mostly denture fixing and whisper bites. Eric was everybody's favourite, a genuinely pleasant man with tales of a glorious past who had managed to find himself alone and somewhat bereft in a 2-room flat with no oven. His neighbour was a wrong un who took advantage, and Eric was clever enough to know about it and lonely enough not to be able to do anything about it. I lent in. Everyone sent with food was told to find 10 minutes to listen to his stories, please. At the beginning of his crisis, we had, with the team at home, long conversations about the risk we were taking in staying open. I didn't know how bad it was going to get. None of us did, but I knew we were being prepared to be mobilised in the Army Reserves, and the old hands in the Army told stories of moving cattle corpses in the foot and mouth crisis. Italy showed pictures of people dying unnoticed, body after body piling up. I had no idea what it would mean for the relatively fit and almost young like us, but I was honest with the team that the safest thing would be to run and stay inside until it was all over. No one wanted that. My fear was if I caught it, it might not go so well for me. 2 bouts of cancer behind me and a bad case of pneumonia 6 months before, whilst on exercise, gave me worry. I talked to my wife, Lucy, about it. If I get it and I have to go in, do we have to talk about this? Yes, there are people dying alone. Lovely. No, I won't be alone. I'll conjure you, Lucy. I'll imagine you into being. And if you know this, then it will help. I don't want to talk about this. It will help me if you know this. Go to sleep. And as it was, of course, it didn't kill the likes of me, not in any great numbers. It took our grandparents and those who had rushed back to help and work in hospitals. It would strike without logic in a young man here, yes, a mother there, but mostly it just made us all sick, wheezy and tired. But I did really worry about Eric dying alone. I lent him. We sent 2 Opera North violinists to teach him how to Zoom, 2 dancers to fix his internet connection. Whatever the excuse, someone else will be dispatched. And in the end, all the members of the team to help with one thing or another. Most of them would report back their concern about an internet girlfriend from Thailand or somewhere similar. When he called with a problem with his smoke alarm, I knew it was time to confront the situation. I had expected to go through my theatre career without having to bring up the delicate subject of whether an 83-year-old was being taken for a fool by the promise of a young exotic girlfriend. I didn't have a handbook for such discussions, so I buggered on through. Have you met her? No. Do you give her money? Sometimes. A lot of money? I haven't got a lot of money. Eric, mate, I don't think you should go on with it. Why? He was upset now. I don't think she's real. Does it matter? She makes me happy. And then I realised it didn't matter a bit. I fixed his smoke alarm and left, and we never spoke about it again.
Yeah. That's a lovely story.
He was top notch, Eric. He was a top lad.
Yeah.
He was in the RAF. He was he later on, because it's too long a reading, but he dies. He ends up in hospice, and he has end of life care, and he dies. And actually, we're really moved because we spent a lot of time with him. But the thing I think that really troubled me was he'd had a really, he was an engineer. He'd been in the RAF for a long time, and he just, I don't know how we I don't mean me and you, but we let it happen. He just ended up on the Malverns in this tiny little flat surrounded by people who didn't care about him and would manipulate him. And he knew it. He was really bright. But for those 8 months, he would ring every morning. I would drive to work, to the food bank. And sometimes I'd have my little boy. And my little boy would just chat to him for hours. Like, he's only 5. And I was like, what are you talking about? But they were quite happy. And there's quite a few stories like that in the book, and quite a few that didn't make it in, of people who we would never have touched the lives of, or they would never have touched our lives. And actually, they were meaningful. They were really, I spoke to Eric pretty much every day for a year and a bit. He died, and I don't speak to anyone every day. Yeah,
Alan, things are changing for Slung, aren't they?
Yes.
So you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so those of you who don't know, working men's clubs are obviously run by a committee voted on by the members, and the members are the people who pay a fee for £6, and they meet every year at an AGM. And at the last AGM, we suggested firmly to the members that they voted us out as managers and we would leave. And we'd spent a lot of money, just over £150,000, in renovating space and putting a lift in and making it accessible, tidied it up, painted it. But we'd reached a point where our vision for the future, and especially the financial vision, but also the kind of social political vision for the future of the club, just didn't meet with many of the members. And there was kind of two options to it. One of which is, there are a lot of members, and I think and a lot of them are new and are clearly friends of ours, not the club. And we were like, I think we'll win a vote. I think we can vote, but then we'd be the people that sort of bullied their way into changing the minds of some people who've been in that club. I mean, one of the former presidents started to go into the club before the Second World War. And I don't agree with him on a single thing. And it is my belief that his vision for the club will see it bankrupt. And I have told him that, and I've argued him with that. And he has a different worldview, and he insists on calling my producer a girl and always getting her name wrong. And he doesn't like it when women have to carry drinks going upstairs, all that stuff. But it's his club. It's his club. Now, I made the argument for 4 years that it's also my club. Not just mine, but it's mine as well. And it's his, and actually that never worked. They never worked. Even we had a committee meeting this week, and the committee I'm on the committee. I've been on the committee for 5 years. Joanna's been in such for 4 years. They don't think of us as the committee. They'll say they'll have a committee meeting, and then we won't be invited, because in their hearts, it is not our club. And we only really have two choices about that. One of which is to force them out, or one of which is to leave. And actually, there was a tipping point over Christmas. And me and my boy moved in because we didn't have any staff to run it. And I moved in over Christmas to work behind the bar for Christmas week. And we just spent every night being shouted at by members who simply, it's absolutely their right to do this. They simply do not believe in the future that we had for the club. They did not like that there were certain groups of people using it. They did not like how we were doing it. They didn't believe that we'd paid off the debts, just really basic stuff like that. And actually, after a while, this stuff's important. It's not legal, it's cultural, it's emotional. And you go, well, whose club is it? And actually, if we cannot be included in the people whose club it is, no matter how much money we invest, no matter what we do, if we're never going to be included in that language, then we absolutely have to leave. Because we are constantly inviting new people in. Like, the turnover of people at the club is huge. We're always inviting you, and we have to be sure that us saying they're okay, they're with us, means something. And it didn't mean anything, not to that group. And it's really sad, because we're talking about a reasonably small group of people who make an incredibly large noise. And I couldn't convince them otherwise. And we tried all sorts of things, and then it started to get nasty. And there was a particularly particularly unpleasant New Year's Eve where there was lots of, and I was like, oh, you can just go. And that's talking right back to the conversation about dynamism, how you make choices. Yeah, we're leaving. I mean, I think it's just cleared £180,000 now, the amount of capital investments of cash, and we're leaving it behind. But what a great thing to do. You know, the oldest working men's club in Britain, notwithstanding the Civic Trust's caveats, is now accessible and is debt free, and they will have money in their bank when we leave on the 14th of December. And once you've made that decision, or once you've had that argument with yourself, and this is literally the argument we had with the team, then you go, well, what are we for then? Because it's not our job to subsidise the beer of a small group of men and women in the oldest working men's club. That is not our job. It suited our purposes to keep the place alive because it's an amazing community centre and it's an amazing arts centre. And the committee move in and they have their plans, and I have every hope that they work, and it continues to be an amazing community centre. That's not, you know, as we say in the army, not my circus, not my monkeys. So what is my circus? So then all of a sudden you go, well, hang on a minute. This is the only public facing building in Holbeck. Yeah. Well, let's make another one, right? Because why wouldn't you? Like, so we moved in. We've got a couple of venues now, but we're a big warehouse space that we've just started converting. That's why I'm in my scraggy clothes. I've just come from building a kitchen and an office, and there'll be 2 stages in there, and the second space in there will be large enough for an orchestra and an opera company, because that's what we'll do by hook or by crook. There'll be full scale, large scale orchestra based opera in Holbeck, but god damn it. And then we also opening another site near Temple, which is the kind of new part of town, which is about artist development. But just that released us once we realized that we were never going to win that argument in the hearts of the members, that actually, you know, we weren't their grandchildren. We didn't have to keep taking their abuse. We can move on. We end up with a huge program of expansion. And that's what we're about. And, you know, you were saying before about innovation and changing, and that's what we're for. Our job is to keep filling the gap that we see. And this is the new gap that we're seeing. We need a major new theatre space in South Leeds, and we're going to open it in January 2023.
Well, we've come full circle, haven't we? Which is great. Which is a great place to finish.
Yeah, brilliant.
Look, this is a great read. It really is. We've heard a couple of extracts from it, but it's just it's lots of things, but it's certainly inspirational, heartwarming. Well, there are lots of adjectives that other people who've commented on the book have used that are probably better than any that I'll use. So, is it available? Where's the best place to buy it?
In all good bookshops. You can go straight to the publisher's Salamander Street and you can order it from there. But all good bookshops, and even bad ones, so all the bookshops in Leeds have it, and it's available on Amazon. Boo! And you can get the audiobook. The audiobook's on Audible, because that's what it is, and it's been brilliantly engineered by our Matt. And if you want to hear me doing silly voices, then get the audiobook.
I think that's an offer that's too good to refuse. I will download that one this evening. That's been brilliant. Really enjoyed that. We'll be putting this on YouTube, and I know lots of people will be listening on there. And best of luck with the new incarnation of Slung Low.
We'll have to have the Civic Trust down to visit. When we've done it, you'll have to come down, and
that will be.
We'll work hard to get a blue plaque one day.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. Another 100 years, we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.